Hi, welcome to EPCC Talks. I am Dr. Amber Archuleta Lucero. Welcome. Thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for listening to us. We really appreciate your support. So, incredible show, as we always do, but extra special. I have friends in the room, so extra special show today. On my left is my guest co-host, Professor James Stepp. He'll talk a little bit about who he is. Professor Claudia Chacon-Haley will be back very shortly. And so, Professor Stepp, would you like to say hi, our audience?
Yes. So I actually am Ruben Sandoval's coordinator at Northwest for the Coronado High School brand, Coronado High School. And, you know, when I first met and evaluated Ruben, I was just struck by the amount of passion that he got from not only himself, but from his students. They were just ready to jump into his class wholeheartedly and share the latest political and news events. And so I feel like I've learned a lot from Professor Sandoval. And as a government professor who's tenure track, fingers crossed, right? I think that Ruben has a lot to share with other faculty and students as well. So I'm happy to be
so
here.
let me thank you, James. Let me formally introduce you to our guest today, Professor Ruben Sandoval Jr. Welcome, a colleague, a friend, just a soul that's always looking for justice and putting himself out there and being very vocal about that. So welcome to EPCC Talks, Ruben.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. I feel very honored to be here.
We're lucky. This actually stemmed from Ruben and I having a conversation. It could have been this prepping for the fall. I wanted him to be on the podcast, and of course, thank you for agreeing.
Oh,
so this is what I'm thinking. This is our vision for today. Let me hear a little bit about you. I want to hear about your journey, academic and social journey. From there, the main segue is talking about your dad, Ruben Sandoval, senior civil rights attorney, huge influence for all Latinos, all people, all Latinos, taking on an incredibly difficult cases based on civil rights and some of the ties and all that stuff. So the intricate details. But let me talk about you first. Tell me where you're born. Talk, if you can too. I always like to hear about your academic journey, but sort of how education, your own education, the outcomes of that, the things you've been able to do with that, Ruben, how that's translated into your identity and your life.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was born in El Paso. So at the time that my parents were married, my father wasn't famous yet. He was not this civil rights crusader, activist, attorney. And my parents were only married for a short time. I was a little kid when they divorced. And so I grew up with my grandparents. My grandparents, my mother, my uncles, they helped to raise me. At that time, my father had been working as a firefighter. And but he decided to run away to law school. And so he went to St. Mary's University. And there he really hooked up with a lot of the giants of the Mexican-American movement, the Chicano rights movement, people like Jose Angel Gutierrez, Willie Velasquez, just to name a few. And so he became good friends with these guys, and they were all involved in the movement. I wasn't around at this point. My mother remarried, and I went to first grade, second grade here. I went to Crockett, and we lived on the poor side of the tracks there. Near Memorial Park. So we moved to East LA. And so for the next 17, almost 18 years, I lived in Los Angeles, East LA. And high school, I was actually supposed to go to the famous Garfield High School.
Were you?
Right, Stand and Deliver.
Yeah.
And, but because I was in the theater pattern. But I had a lot of gangster friends and a lot of druggy friends. And so my parents were trying to get me away from that crowd. And I was already being too influenced by them as it was. So I ended up going to another school, which was called Scher High School, which was in Monterey Park, next city over, just north of East LA. And that was predominantly Asian. Boy, did that make a difference. Academically, you're in an environment, very competitive. So it really made a huge difference. Had I gone to Garfield, it might have been a different story. From there, I ended up going to East LA Community College, ELAC. And I also went to Cal State University.
Nice.
And at Cal State University, LA, I got a degree in poli-sci. So I was always fascinated with government, poli-sci, with just a passion. Maybe it's in the blood. Maybe it's genetic. Who knows? So I did graduate. I actually graduated top 5 cum laude. And from there, I had wanted to go to law school. And now, growing up, I had very little interaction with my father. I only met him a few times as a child. I mostly learned about him, ironically, through newspaper clippings. So we didn't get a lot of stories about the court cases, the Chicano movement here. We learned a lot about Cesar Chavez at that time. This is back in the 70s and the 80s, but we didn't get a lot of stuff out of Texas. So my grandparents would get clippings for stories on famous cases my father was handling, and so they would send them to me. And I kept the scrapbook. That's what I forgot to bring. I'll bring it next time. I have a scrapbook, and I have all the articles and the pictures. So later in life, I did reach out to him, and my goal was to go to law school. I wanted to go to law school, kind of continue the movement. And so when I got out of college, the plan was to go to San Antonio, go to St. Mary's Law School. He had gone to St. Mary's. And so I moved to San Antonio, but it didn't work out. There's a lot of stuff there. We can talk about this later, but it didn't go well. And so I ended up going to grad school at St. Mary's. I ended up borrowing money. I got a GSL, finished my degree, and then I left, and I came to El Paso. I came to El Paso actually because I had to get ready for my comprehensives. And so I was here for matriculating for a semester, preparing for my comps. And but remember, I had lived here before, and I decided to just stay here. After I had passed my comps, I decided to stay in El Paso. Didn't want to go back to LA. There was really nothing for me there. Just
your roots are here.
And not only that, I think there were just too many temptations to go down a path of crime or something nefarious. Trust me. And so and now my loans were coming due. And fortunately, I had an aunt who worked at UTEP. She was actually the secretary to the dean of education. So she goes, why don't you go enroll at UTEP and get certified to be a teacher, and that'll defer your loans. And I was okay, I'll do that. So I was just going to do this for a little while, maybe teach for a year or two until I could figure out what I wanted to do or find a job or maybe find money for law school or something like that. And that was 34, almost 35 years ago. That was back in 90. And so, I'm still...
How do you think... me too. I have 26 years in, Ruben. Teaching's giving me incredible meaning. But what has it done for your life personally? How do you walk away from each day? How do you kind of gain better insight to a better Ruben, a better teacher, a better this? But what has it meant to you personally to be teaching? I mean, sometimes you just walk away. The dopamine's so high because somebody lit up, you made a difference. How do you put that in perspective in your own life, your own context?
Well, it depends which classes you're talking about. Because I've taught them all. When I've taught freshmen, not so much of a happy experience, but having done dual credit, having done AP before that, yes, I mean, it's hard to believe you're getting paid to do this.
I know.
I'm actually getting paid to kind of share knowledge and interact with the students and get them passionate about the issues. And I'm making, we don't get paid well, obviously, but, you're getting paid for something that you like, that you enjoy, that you have a passion for. So that's been a blessing. I had no idea I wanted to go into education. I think right around the time of graduate school, I started kind of getting interested in maybe teaching, especially with some of my courses. I was thinking, I could teach that. I could do that. So there was a little bit of that seed embedded. And like I said, I was just going to do this as a temporary thing.
I know.
I didn't think I would make a career out of it.
I know.
34 years later, here we are. And I did middle school. Middle school was that was a tough assignment. That's when I realized I would wake up every day, come home, every day and think, oh my God, what have I done? What have I done? Oh my, is there something I could do? Could I go back and change my major or something? And then from there, I got recruited to the high school. I worked at Burgess for 8 years. I was at Parkland Middle before that. And then in 2000, I come to Coronado. And so I'm doing some AP classes at Coronado, and then suddenly this dual credit program comes along. It was a relatively new thing. And so I thought, well, I've got a master's degree. Maybe I can teach this. And so I looked into the credentialing. I had admin on board, and we started offering dual credit around 2008. And from there, that's how I got involved with EPCC. And so the coordinator that I had at that time was Mr. Silva.
Yeah.
And he's like, he came in and he was also very impressed with the classes. And he says, I got good news for you. He goes, I want to offer you a job. You want to work for us? I said, sure. What I got to do? And so he had offered me some part-time courses teaching at Fort Bliss.
Oh.
And at that time
I
it
didn't know you
was
were out there.
history. And I actually enjoyed it. I was like, wow, I'm actually teaching college courses with adults, not high school kids. And it started developing even more of a passion for it. Later on, for a while there, our school, our district had something called the cohort program. So the cohort program, basically, if you wanted to go back and get another master's to teach a different area, and they would pay for it. So I applied, I was accepted, and so I went and got the credentialing for poli-sci, because I really wanted to teach government. I mean, I love history. I've always done very well. Wills did well in STAR, but really, government was my passion. And so, like I said, as I said before, it's hard to believe that I'm getting paid to talk about things. It's almost like having it's like being on like a Crossfire, these political shows where you kind of interact and get people's ideas and you kind of bounce around some.
It's a special place. It really is. The classroom's magical many times, But no, I really appreciate that, and I really did want to hear from you. It's important.
Thank you.
How one articulates their own journey, right? So, as we segue in talking about your father, Ruben Sandoval Sr., I want to hear a little bit about. I know we talked about his school, but what was his impetus for going to college? Grew up here in El Paso. How from what you understand, how did he get to law school?
Okay, so a little bit that I know, or from what I remember, what my mother would tell me too. So he was, my father was going to UT Austin, and so he was in El Paso, and he liked to party a lot, and he was in Juarez, and he got into some trouble over there, and as a result of something that happened in Mexico, he wasn't able to go back to UT Austin. So he ended up finishing up his degree at UTEP. He got his degree in economics. By the time my parents had married, like I said, I believe he was working as a firefighter at that time, but he felt like he wanted to do something more. Now, where he got the spark, I know he looked up to these big famous attorneys like Melvin Belli, and others. I'm sure he might have been inspired by like Thurgood Marshall and people like that. So he had always wanted to go to law school. So as soon as my parents divorced, he ended up going to St. Mary's. And like I said, when he got out, he started working for LULAC. And he was one of their chief counsels. And I think that's how he got involved in these cases, these big, high-profile cases back in the 70s, which made him pretty famous for the day.
Respect to LULAC, Maldev, the San Antonio case, versus Hernandez. I mean, just huge, huge cases that had such an impact.
Of course.
I wanted kind of in particular to talk about two of the main cases that your dad handled, really big cases, significant impact today. We're still talking about it. And the reason I think it's so significant, Ruben, you're talking before social media, you're talking about printed papers, you're talking about information moving, usually from person to person. So I'm thinking about if your dad was here now, he was dealing with these cases, the huge, social media presence likely these cases would have, right? Because number one, what was happening to Latinos during that particular time period, and then policing at that time. So let's it's coming on the next year. I think you told me the first case that he handled, which is Mr. Morales. That first case.
Actually, it was a Santos case.
It was a Santos case first. Case. Forgive me. Then Morales 2 years later, I think. So set up the scenario for us. What happened to a young man, I believe 12, 13 years old. And then from there, if you can give us some context, some background, and then the entry of your dad and the outcome. We'll just talk about the Santos case first.
So this was Dallas, early 1970s. And what had happened, there was a police officer named Daryl Kane. Daryl Kane was a Vietnam vet. He had been working with the police department for a while, and he had gotten into some trouble. Essentially, he had killed an unarmed suspect, an African American. Never suffered any kind of consequences for killing this person, other than they moved him to another department, and he was assigned to an area called Little Mexico, a predominantly Latino community in Dallas. His partner was a guy named Roy Arnold, and but it was well known that there was a lot of discrimination against Latinos, especially by the police. It was institutionalized, and so there was these two brothers, David and Santos Rodriguez. Santos was 12, David was 13, and I guess they came from a troubled background. The mother had been put in jail. She had been arrested. I don't know if she was in prison or she was in jail because she had an abusive boyfriend who had been beating her, so she had killed the guy. Mm-hmm. So as a result, the two boys were given to the grandfather, and the grandfather didn't speak English. So I'm sure the kids were probably in minor trouble. They didn't have the best of care. And so there had been a report. This is in a hot July evening in 1973. There was a report that a gas station, a Fina, had been broken into and money had been stolen from the vending machine. It was a cigarette machine. And there was a report of 2 suspects fleeing the scene. So for whatever reason, Officer Kane and Arnold decided to go to the residence of these 2 boys, and without any probable cause, without a search warrant, without anything really, other than let's round up the usual suspects.
Yeah.
So it's about 2:30 in the morning, and they wake up the 2 boys. They're asleep. The grandfather does not speak English, and the police demanded they be turned over and put in custody. So they're taken in. Again, these kids have no idea. They're children, and they're not afforded any of the constitutional protections that we give everyone. They were not read their Miranda rights. They were not afforded the 5th or 6th Amendment rights. They were not given the right to get an attorney or have an attorney present. Instead, they were handcuffed. They were put into a police vehicle, taken to the scene of the crime, and interrogated. And so the older brother, David, is in the front seat, handcuffed. The younger brother, Santos, is in the back seat. So Officer Kane goes to the back seat and begins to interrogate the little boy and starts telling him to confess to the crime. And of course, the kids are hysterical. The little boy's hysterical. He had nothing to confess to because he had not committed a crime. And again, he's a kid. And so the officer pulls out a .357 Magnum and starts playing Russian roulette with the little boy. Now, the officer claimed that he had emptied his gun, right? There were no bullets in the chamber, but evidently there were some bullets in there. So he pulled out the gun, put it to the kid's head, pulled the trigger, nothing happened. And the kid, of course, is, frantic, beside himself. And again, he tells the little boy to confess to having broken into this gas station, and the little boy has nothing to confess to. So again, he pulls the gun and pulls the trigger. This time it fires, and it blows off the kid's head, and right in the officer's the back of the vehicle, while his brother's in the front seat. Wow. And the officer jumps out and is very surprised at what's happened. The other officer, who was not in the car, says, "What happened?" He says, "Well, I shot the kid. It was an accident. It was an accident." Well, it was not an accident, but either way, they left the little boy in there for 10 minutes with his brother before they called for help. When they took him to the hospital, I think they took him to Parkland, the same Parkland that Kennedy was taken to. And there he was pronounced dead. Eventually what happened, they did file charges against the Officer Kane. And actually the one who filed the charges was Henry Wade, who was the district attorney for Dallas at that time. The same Henry Wade in Roe versus Wade. And but they came up with an unusual charge, and it was murder with malice. Instead of just first-degree murder, a felony, capital murder, it was murder with malice. I had never heard of that before. And so, and again, he probably would not have been tried, but there was so much outrage from the Mexican-American community another unjust death. Because, as you know, throughout the history, I mean, so many minorities were killed by police, and there was never an accountability. It was done with impunity, especially because police have qualified immunity, so they could get away. They literally had a license to kill. But eventually, Henry Wade impaneled a grand jury. He was indicted and charged with murder with malice. And he was convicted in court. And for murder with malice, he was only given 5 years.
Wow.
For what he did. And so my father...
He was in his 30s, right? You said...
Yes.
Daryl? Okay.
Yeah, he was a young man. He must have been in his 30s. Yeah, he was in the early 30s.
Do you think that's why he was charged with murder with malice? Did it have extra requirements that the DA felt, maybe perhaps he would be able to get off with a lesser sentence?
Probably.
Like he ended up doing?
I think because of qualified immunity. But this was such a flagrant violation. I mean, I'm sure there's nothing in the manual that says interrogate prisoners with the .357 Magnum playing Russian roulette. So they had to charge him with something. But, why it was not capital murder is just astounding. So, yes, the Mexican-American community was outraged. Maldiff got involved. LULAC got involved. And my father got involved. And like I said, he was working for LULAC at the time. And he came to represent the families. So he represented the Rodriguez family and the death of Santos. And so when he got the conviction, my father appealed to Washington, D.C. At that time, Carter was president, and was trying to persuade the Justice Department, the DOJ, to file federal charges. A violation of Santos's civil rights. Yeah. A clear violation of his Fifth Amendment and 14th Amendment rights to due process and equal protection. And DOJ wouldn't take it. They said that it violated the Fifth Amendment double jeopardy provision. You cannot try somebody twice for the same crime, even though there were two separate charges. It was the state charge and the federal charge. So in the end, they could not persuade DOJ to take the case. So he ended up, Officer Kane got 5 years. Of that 5 years, he only served 2.5 years.
Wow, Ruben. Wow.
You get time off for good behavior.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that he was a police officer, he was a military veteran, all these things, I'm sure, factored in his favor. So, when he got out of prison, he got out in 1979. And this, by the way, the lawyers appealed the case. They appealed this conviction. And so it went to the highest criminal court in Texas, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. And it was Kane versus Texas. Check on that. And they upheld this conviction. And so he served the 5 years, the 2.5 years. Wow. He gets out in 79, and he relocates to Lubbock, became, I believe, a real estate agent, and lived out the rest of his life. I don't know if anybody knew his dirty little secrets. Yeah. But, and I found his obituary, which I found interesting. He only died a couple of years ago. And he had remarried, he had children.
And didn't you say he didn't have anything reflecting he was an officer, he had served in the military, nothing like that?
All that stuff was probably, I'm sure there was, none of that was ever brought up. I don't know if his wife knew, his family. That it would be impossible to tell.
How did your father convince President Carter and the Justice Department to actually file this case? What was his...
Well, he didn't. They wouldn't take the case. They refused. They said it violated the double jeopardy provision of the Constitution. It was the second case that he finally was able to prevail. But yes, so like I said, Daryl Kane lived out his life and lived, in essence, happily ever after, despite the fact what he had done. I mean, it's very well remembered in Dallas. There's generational trauma from what had happened, especially when you see cases where, again, it's an unjust killing of a minority in custody. It brings that about. And so there's remembrances in Dallas. But now, as far as Daryl Kane, did he ever express remorse? I've never found anything in the research that I've done. I did find his obituary, as I said before, and there was nothing in the obituary. He was this loving father, loving grandfather, and died happily as of old age.
Do we happen to know what happened to Santos's brother?
No, I understand he's still alive. I've always wanted to meet him.
I know, right? He'd be.
I talked to Dr. Morton
He was
about it.
15 in 73.
He would have been 13 in 73.
73.
Yeah, so he would be, be in the certain early 60s.
Yeah.
And I talked to Dr. Morton, who wrote the play about the Morales case, and he was going to look into it, but I don't think he was able to find anything.
Yeah.
I'm sure that if I had the resources, I'd probably go to Dallas and try to find these people. I understand the mother's still alive and the brother's still alive. But that would be something maybe we can look into, maybe once we kind of get the word out, remind people what happened. Maybe they'd like to, be contacted. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I would approach it. I would just say, well, I'm the son of the lawyer.
No, that's already
and,
inroads, right?
They may want to
Your
talk
dad
about it. They
was-
may
yeah.
not want to talk about it.
Yeah.
What I do remember this, so I was telling you, I only met my father a few times growing up as a kid, but I remember when he had gotten this case, there was one time I was in El Paso visiting my grandparents. He was in El Paso. He was here either for a court case or meeting with this judge or meeting with this lawmaker. So I remember my aunt telling me, your father's in town. Would you like to meet with him or see him? And I remember we met at a diner, and so again, I'm a little kid. I'm very young at this point in time, and he was on the phone all the time, constantly talking to this judge, talking to this state rep or state senator. And I remember that he was kind of annoyed. He really didn't want to talk with me. Yeah, he agreed to meet with me, but he had more important things on his mind. And I remember he handed me a folder. And he says, why don't you take a look at this for a while? And I guess, it would preoccupy me while he was on the phone talking to somebody who was, I suppose, was important. And as I looked through the file, they were pictures of that case. And I remember seeing they had, I guess, cut sections out of the back seat. And I remember they were caked with blood. And I had seen the crime photos. I should have been seeing them, but I'm sure that didn't matter. at that point.
Days were different back then, right?
Yeah, days were different. Yes, and so, but I remember seeing the file. I did try to look for those photos later because there is some of the research I did. I was able to go to special collections up at UTEP.
Yes.
They do have a lot of material. A lot of it was donated by Dr. Morton, and I was able to find a lot of crime scene photos of other cases that he handled. But I could not find those, the ones I remember as a kid. But I remember they were pretty gruesome. They're pretty graphic.
Yeah.
How did you feel about your father growing up? I mean, on one hand, he was a hero. On the other hand, he was kind of absent. So how did your personal journey?
Yeah, it's complicated. It's complicated. It's what do you do? I mean, I think. As a young kid, you kind of have these this romanticized idealism about your father or your parents. So that's why I thought, well, you know what, I'd like to take up his work. I'd like to maybe do what he's doing. Maybe take up the mantle when he's ready to pass it on. So I think that was always in the back of my mind. So I wanted to go to law school. But yes, I mean, there's also the flip side of the coin. I mean, he was absent. He really did not help us. He was already famous. I'm sure he was making very good money, and he did not really offer to help us, my mother and I, out very much at all. In fact, if anything, we had to take him to court. Well, my mother did. I don't remember very much about it. My mother numerous times had to take him to court just to get him to pay money he owed in child support that he was not paying, and he would use the law to great effect to do everything he could to not pay. So there's confliction there. Obviously, it is, but what can you do? They say it is what it is, right?
No, it is. No, and you grow up, you have different perspectives. You start your own family. There's all these variances and nuances to life, right? Not everything is black and white. There's always this grayness to everything. So let me do this. Ruben is sticking around for a part 2. James is going to take the lead on the Morales case. And so I just wanted to say again, thank you so much for tuning in today. We are doing a part 1 and part 2 with Professor Ruben Sandoval Jr. and my guest co-host, Professor James Stepp. So thank you so much again for tuning in.